Picture a quiet English countryside estate in the years just before World War II really roars into full motion. No one driving past would guess that behind the fences, wooden huts would light up night after night with the glow of frantic effort. No one would suspect that thousands of people, many of them young women from universities, others from wartime services, all of them bound together by secrecy, were trying to do the impossible. Break the German Enigma code. And not once, not if we get lucky, but day after day, reliably enough to shape battles. For nearly 30 years after the war ended, that achievement stayed buried, not behind ordinary forgetfulness, behind something far harsher. Oaths, silence, official rules that were so strict some people never even told their own families what they had really done. That's the tragedy of these front lines. They mattered as much as any battlefield, and yet they left no public medals, no portraits in parades, no names on plaques. Because the people who made a difference learned an unsettling truth about power in wartime. Sometimes the biggest victories arrive disguised as absence. The secret everyone had to keep. When the war was over, the story didn't end where most wars do, where a nation says, "Thank you." Instead, the British government kept asking for one more thing: silence. The staff at Bletchley Park had been given an oath of secrecy so absolute that many only spoke about their work in vague, harmless terms. To outsiders, they might sound like they were doing clerical tasks, administration, routine wartime work, anything that wouldn't trigger questions. Some families grew old with the assumption that their loved ones had spent the war in comfort or boredom. Others simply stopped asking. What could you ask, after all, when the rules were clear and the consequences were real? And it wasn't only about reputation. It was about the intelligence value of what had been done. Because the Germans weren't the only people who could use Enigma. After the war, captured Enigma machines were quietly passed along, and other countries continued experimenting with similar systems. The practical lesson was brutal but simple. If Britain had broken the code's weaknesses, then those weaknesses could still be used, so long as the world didn't know they'd been exposed. So they stayed quiet. No medals, no public credits, no "we did this and it mattered." Just a long, careful disappearance of the truth. To understand what these people were up against, you have to imagine not a neat, fixed cipher, like a word puzzle that stays the same every day, but a living machine that changes its mind constantly. Enigma wasn't just a code you could decode by staring at letter patterns for long enough. It was a mechanical and electrical encryption device, roughly the size of a portable typewriter, built to scramble every letter based on a shifting internal setup. Here's the core idea in plain terms. When an operator typed a letter, electrical signals traveled through a set of rotating wheels, rotors. Those rotors didn't just replace letters randomly. They transformed the signal according to their internal wiring, like a maze with walls that shift as the maze moves. And then the machine advanced the rotors after every key press. So if you typed the same letter twice in a row, the output would almost certainly be different. That one detail was a direct attack on a familiar technique codebreakers had used for centuries: frequency analysis. If the cipher behaved consistently, letter patterns would repeat, and careful observers could start drawing conclusions. Enigma didn't give you that kind of stability. It kept moving under your feet. Then there was the even bigger issue: the number of possible daily settings. The machine's starting rotor positions, which rotors were selected, and the wiring added through a plug board created an astronomically large number of configurations, hundreds of trillions, depending on the version and period. And German military command didn't use the same settings for days at a time. They changed them daily. So even if someone managed to decode yesterday's traffic, that success would be useless tomorrow, because tomorrow would be a different starting configuration. In other words, Enigma didn't ask codebreakers to solve one puzzle. It asked them to solve a new puzzle every day, over and over, under wartime pressure. German leadership believed that this approach made Enigma essentially invulnerable, at least to any conventional cryptographic method available at the time. They used it for everything: naval movements in the Atlantic, air operations, army coordination across multiple theaters. If allies could break Enigma reliably, day after day, then it wouldn't just be intelligence. It would be an edge so powerful it could reshape the war. Because you'd be able to read German plans faster than they could anticipate your response. And that's why Bletchley Park existed. Bletchley Park, a secret place built for unusual brains. Bletchley Park was a country estate about 50 miles northwest of London. It was chosen partly because it was secluded enough not to draw attention, but also because it was well connected. Rail and telegraph lines made communication easier. Someone had the foresight to hide something crucial in plain sight: an ordinary-looking estate supporting an extraordinary operation. Within it, an entire intelligence ecosystem took shape. Rather than running like a typical military office, it spread across the estate's grounds in rapidly built wooden huts. Each hut developed a specialty. Each hut became a world. Some of the most famous included Hut 8, focused on naval Enigma traffic, U-boat communications across the Atlantic. Hut 6 focused more on Army and Air Force messages. The operation ran around the clock. German communications didn't wait until morning, and Allied codebreakers didn't get to turn off just because it was inconvenient. At its peak, the workforce reached nearly 10,000 people, and most of them were women. This is one of the most important and often underappreciated truths about Bletchley Park. It wasn't only a story of famous mathematicians. It was a massive human machine powered by talent, discipline, and teamwork. Many of the women were recruited from university backgrounds or from the Women's Royal Naval Service. Their roles stretched far beyond the romantic idea of code-breaking alone. They operated mechanical devices like the Bombe. They managed complex indexing systems that helped connect decrypted messages to patterns. They translated German text. They handled logistics, getting the right intelligence to the right people quickly enough to influence real decisions. Everything had to stay secret, and the work had to keep flowing, even when machines broke down and nights felt endless. In one sense, Bletchley Park was built on an unusual marriage. Mathematics meets manufacturing. Genius meets repetition. Precision meets exhaustion. And among the people drawn into that machine were names that later history would recognize, and names that might never be known at all. The story of Enigma breaking doesn't begin at Bletchley Park. It begins years earlier in Poland, when the threat from Nazi Germany was still something many countries underestimated. Polish intelligence had intercepted Enigma communications since the early 1930s. Long before most of Europe fully understood the stakes, Polish mathematicians were already wrestling with the problem. One of the key figures was Marian Rejewski, a young mathematician who and his team achieved major breakthroughs. They managed to reconstruct the wiring of a military Enigma version without physically examining the German machine itself. That sounds almost impossible if you picture code breaking as something you do by brute force and patience, but their insight wasn't only about guessing correctly. It was about reasoning. Understanding the underlying structure well enough to model what the machine must be doing. Then came the next leap. They built their own early devices, precursors to the bomb, designed to test possible settings much faster than a human could do by hand. For a time, Poland's work allowed them to read a significant portion of German military traffic. That insight mattered during the build-up to war, when intelligence could reveal movement and intent before armies fully mobilized. But the problem grew harder. Germany increased complexity, adding more rotors, strengthening the encryption. Poland's resources were limited, especially compared with what Britain and France would later bring to the table. And then, summer 1939 arrived, tense, uncertain, and increasingly deadly. As the invasion of Poland became almost inevitable, Polish officials made a decision that seems almost unthinkable when you consider the stakes for their own national security. They shared everything they had, complete accumulated knowledge, methods, working replicas with French and British intelligence.
They did it just weeks before Poland was invaded and occupied. That transfer wasn't a small help, it was a foundation. Without it, Britain's Bletchley operation might have taken much longer to crack Enigma, and even if they succeeded, the timing could have meant the difference between victory and disaster.
Some historians argue the delay might have been so large that it could have changed the war's outcome. So before the Allies built a secret army of codebreakers on British soil, a smaller, earlier group had already taken on the same challenge and passed the torch. And then, under the threat of invasion, Poland did what good allies do at the darkest moments. It made sure that the knowledge survived. By the time Britain's key breakthroughs fully accelerated, the operation needed something that humans alone could not provide. Even with brilliant analysts and careful reasoning, the day-to-day problem was too large. Each day offered an enormous number of potential settings to test. Even if you could rule out large chunks of possibilities through logic, there were still far too many combinations to check manually. That's where Alan Turing comes in. Turing was a young Cambridge-trained mathematician, already known for deep thinking about computation, ideas about what kinds of tasks could be performed by mechanical processes. At Bletchley Park, he recognized a simple bottleneck. You can't think your way through an astronomically huge search space fast enough to matter in wartime. What you need is a system that can test possibilities rapidly and automatically, then let humans verify the likely winners. Turing led the design of an electromechanical device known as the bombe. It wasn't a computer in the modern sense, but it was a machine built for this specific purpose, mimicking the logic of Enigma's rotor wiring in a way that allowed many settings to be checked quickly. Instead of a person turning knobs and checking outcomes one at a time, multiple Bombe machines ran continuously, hundreds of mechanical steps, dozens of rotating drums designed to narrow down the possibilities. The goal wasn't to automatically solve the entire encryption in one magical jump. The goal was more realistic and more powerful, reduce the impossible to the manageable. Then humans could step in, use language understanding, and decide what made sense. It was a team effort, automation doing the brute checking and humans doing the interpretation that machines could never truly understand. 6. Cribs, where human guesswork met machine power. Even with the Bombe working at speed, code breaking still wasn't effortless. Because the Bombe needed something to aim at, some hints about what a message might contain. This is where the concept of cribs enters the story. A crib was an educated guess about likely plaintext, part of a German message that codebreakers suspected would appear with predictable wording or formatting. Germany's communications often followed structured routines. For example, some messages used fairly consistent phrasing, especially in official contexts. Weather reports tended to follow repeatable patterns and were sent at regular times. That meant codebreakers could reasonably predict chunks of what the plaintext might be. And sometimes, Germany made it easier by human error. Operator habits could introduce vulnerabilities. Some operators began messages with predictable phrases. Others reused earlier day settings when they shouldn't. Simple laziness, simple mistake, and suddenly the impossible cipher had cracks. A crib didn't mean the entire message was solved automatically. It meant you had a starting point, a piece of a puzzle you could use to test whether a candidate configuration could produce that expected fragment. The Bombe could then spin through possibilities far more quickly than any human could, checking which settings would make the guessed plaintext appear correctly. Once the right configuration emerged, translation and interpretation began. And that interpretation was its own specialized art. Decoded German text often didn't arrive as clean, modern sentences. It arrived as fragmentary military shorthand, abbreviations, terminology, context-dependent phrasing. To turn it into useful intelligence, translators and analysts needed not just German language knowledge, but a deep familiarity with how German forces communicated day to day. So while the machines narrowed the search, the people turned results into meaning. Joan Clark, one of the minds behind the work. In the larger public imagination, people often associate Bletchley Park with the most famous name. But within the operation, contributions came from many minds. One of the most significant women to work at advanced analytical levels was Joan Clark. Clark was among a small number of women operating at the highest analytical tier rather than in primarily support roles. She worked closely alongside Turing in Hut 8 on Naval Enigma.
And beyond her professional impact, her relationship with Turing was briefly engaged during the war, a personal detail that later history would treat carefully, because these were people living inside a secret world where emotions and facts were both constrained by the need for silence.
Clark's presence is a reminder that intelligence work wasn't just helping along. At Bletchley Park, women were essential to the core intellectual process that transformed intercepted signals into actionable information. And yet, because secrecy lasted so long, many of those contributions remained invisible for decades. The Battle of the Atlantic, when decryption meant survival. If Enigma breaking was important in theory, it was terrifying in practice, especially in the Battle of the Atlantic. Picture the Atlantic as a lifeline and a graveyard at the same time. German U-boats targeted Allied merchant ships, bringing food, fuel, and war materials from North America to Britain.